And then welcome in everyone. Today we have a certified CPA, Akil Banzel, with us. Mr. Banzel is now starting his own company. He's the founder of USA Tech Gurus. And then today we'll be focusing on specifically tax pro tips for F1, H1B, those background who are international students or at one point were international students. So today's session will be focusing on to a couple of things. For example, determining what your actual tax status is from all of the tax forms and deductions that you might be eligible for. And then we will have Akil sharing us a tax guide for example, the W-2 employees and the differences between W-2 to 1099. And then what if you are working remotely? What would that make your tax be? And then we're going to share some insights with tax filing apps. We know they are popular and people are curious about which platforms should I use or should I use tax apps at all, and especially for backgrounds with OPT, CPT, and H1B. And finally, we're going to have half session today dedicated to a live Q&A, free Q&A session with our CPA, Akil here. So if you have any questions you want to follow up, feel free to scan the QR code right now. We can connect you with Akil, or if you have any other questions, we can take a look and see if we can answer them for you. And before we jump into today's session, I want to briefly talk about who we are as the host. We're GoElite, an education consultancy based in Los Angeles. Our primary focus would be Day One CPT University support and guidance. And we also work with students with different background, for example, F1 reinstatement and change of status sometime. And we are certified by AIRC as one of the most respectful education organizations in the US. And some of the things we have going on, we are very happy to launch our Day One CPT community platform, which in here you can earn reward points and by doing some simple activities, for example, refer programs to friends, join our live chat, group chat, and stuff like that. And we also have a current going event with H1B blessing. So H1B result is all around the corner. So if you are looking for a little bit of extra luck, feel free to click the link down below at our resource tab, and then you can join our events. And we're also on Google reviews, so feel free to check us out on Google. We currently have more than 500 reviews, see what others talked about us. And here is all of our social media handles, so feel free to take a look as well. And without further ado, I will give the stage to Akil to let him introduce himself and today's webinar. Hi, Akil.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I'm going to quickly present my screen and let's take it forward from there. Awesome. Ryan, can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay. Great. Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I'm Akhil. Akhil Bansal. I'm a CPA, Certified Public Accountant. Today, I'm going to go over 1040s, 1040 NRs, tax rules for residents, non-residents, people on visas, F1, H1B, transitions, right? So a lot of these things will impact your taxes if you're living in the US. So we'll go over some of those rules today. And then during the later half, happy to answer any questions that you have regarding your taxes, right? So the agenda for today will cover 1040s, 1040 NRs, what are the filing requirements, right? How do you determine your residency statuses? We'll cover a few deductions, credits, and then stimulus checks as well. This was a hot topic back in 22, 23, but I'm assuming some of you may have tax returns from back then as well. So we'll try to touch upon those Social Security and Medicare taxes, and common tax forms like Ryan said, W-2s, 1099s, right? What do they mean? And we'll cover a few of those things. Amendments, IRS notices, as well as a few tax apps that you can use either to file yourself or if you need to work with a CPA, we'll cover a few of those points. Uh, Before we go on to that, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. So I'm Akhil Bansal. I'm a CPA, certified public accountant. I went to Northeastern University for my bachelor's and master's. I did a bachelor's in accounting and MIS, and then master's in accounting with a concentration in tax. And I've worked with some of the best accounting firms out there, PwC being one of them. So I started at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in their Boston division under audit, transitioned into corporate taxes, and then eventually moved to LA for international tax. Uh, and then since 2020, I've been running my own firm. It's called USA Tax Gurus LLC. And, we work with tons of international people who are coming into the US on different visas, people who are switching visas from one class to the other. And not just tax filing, but we also do tax planning, right? We also work with business owners, right? If any of you are entrepreneurial and you've started your own, businesses, or you aspire to start your own startups, right? So incorporating the company, C corps, LLCs, S corps, right? Bookkeeping, payroll, a lot of those things we're doing as an accounting firm. So it's, our experience is not just limited to tax filing for immigrants, but we do, work with people across the US, across the world, and guide them on US tax and legal compliances. So that's a little bit about us. And Yeah, let's dive into taxes now. So the first question that most of the international students have is, are you a resident or non-resident? So let's break down this question. Like, what does that mean, and why it's important? Because residents file something known as a 1040. Non-residents file something known as a 1040 NR, right? So that's, if you know the answer to this question, you're pretty much halfway there, right? Like what tax return you have to file. So to determine if you're a resident or not, so again, like I said, tax residents will file 1040s. These are the three ways you can find out if you're a tax resident. Either you're a US citizen, you're a green card holder, or um, you've been in the US for more than 183 days as per substantial presence test. SPT, substantial presence test, there's like a look back rule. You have to look into last 2 years and then calculate, based on like certain formulas. But for this presentation purposes, let's try to keep it simple, and, we'll call it 183 days as of last year, right? So if you were in the US, let's say in 2024 for more than 183 days, right, you cross SPT. So we'll try to keep it very simple for this presentation. Right, so if you meet any of these three, if you're a US citizen, green card holder, or you meet your SPT, which is if you are in the US for more than 183 days in a particular year, you're going to be considered a resident. I have a small note at the bottom that says SPT doesn't apply to F1 students for the first 5 years or J1 scholars for the first 2 years of their stay in the US. What that means is if you're on F1 visa, you don't really look at SPT, right? So SPT doesn't matter for the first 5 years. So you only look at if you're a US citizen, green card holder. If you're not, then as an F1 student for the first 5 years, you will not consider SPT and you will actually be treated as a 1040 NR. So what that means is a tax non-resident will be someone who's F1 student for the first 5 years, J1 student for the first, J1 students, scholars, teachers, right? So all of them for the first 2 years. And then any other visa holders, for example, people come on H1B, L1, for them, the SPT does apply. But if you've been in the US for less than 183 days, then you're still considered a non-resident, right? So this is basically how we can break it down, right? If you're gonna be a resident or a non-resident for tax filing purposes, and if you'll be filing a 1040 or a 1040 NR. Now, when we're talking about F1, we're talking about F1 as the visa, F1 CPT, F1 OPT, right? Even day one, like CPT and OPT programs as well, right? So when we're talking about F1, we're talking about all of those. So you may come for a grad program, and be in the US for 2 years and then move to STEM OPT, right? For another 2 years, you're probably on OPT. But that entire period, you were on an F1, right? So 2 years on F1 during school and then 2 years on F1 OPT. All of those 4 years are, your um, non-resident years. So you will be filing a 1040 NR during that period. When it gets complicated is when you transition from, let's say, F1 to H1B, right? So we'll cover a few of those cases in the next slides. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them to Ryan, and we can cover them after this. Once we're done with this presentation. Great. So I know we may have people from different countries here, right? So in each country, they have different tax years, calendar years, right? So in the US, we follow the same. The tax year is the calendar year, right? So for most of the cases, there are fiscal year filers as well, but 99% it's your tax year is going to be the calendar year. So when we're talking about 2024 taxes, we're talking about um, oops, there's a typo here. So this was meant to be 2024. So 2024 tax return means anything that was filed from 1/1/24 to 12/31/24, and this would be 23. So 2023 tax return will be basically 23 year, right? So small typo here, so disregard that. But the tax year is the same year as the calendar year. Um, Calculating first 5 years in the US for F1 people, right? So just giving a quick example, let's say if somebody came to the US on an F1 visa in 2020, the entire year of 2020 will be considered their first year, right? 2021 will be considered their second year, 2022 will be considered their third year, so on and so forth, right? So sixth year, the 2025 would be their resident year filing. So first 5 years, they'll be filing as a non-resident, right? So it doesn't matter if you enter the US on December 31st or September 1st, right? The first year is the year that you enter. Or even if you spend a single day in the US in that year, that will be counted as the entire year. If people change from F1 to H1B, that's when things get a little bit complicated. For example, let's say if somebody entered the US in 2020 on F1, and then moved and they were on F1 for the first 2 years. Third year, let's say they changed from F1 to H1B, right? So in that year, that is when we'll have to determine if we'll be filing a 1040 NR or a 1040, right? So we have to do some certain calculations, right? How many days would be counted for F1? How many days will be counted towards H1B, right? So there's a few of those things that we need to consider before we make that determination. But if you, let's say the year after that, if you're on H1B for the entire year, then you're definitely filing as a resident. So the transition years are important for you to figure out if you're going to be filing a resident or a non-resident return. Some special rules, CPT, OPT, same rules as your visa class. So like I said, right, if you're on F1 CPT, F1 OPT, it'll be the same rules. And like we discussed, if you graduate, right, even if you are on OPT, you may still be considered a non-resident, right, if you're in the first 5 years of your non-resident period. Some other facts: non-residents can only file a single or married filing separate. You cannot file a married filing joint tax return. There are only under certain circumstances you may be allowed to file a married filing joint, but that is usually when one of the spouses, they are residents, right? So if one person is a resident and one person is a non-resident, then you can make certain special elections to treat the non-resident person as a resident. So only when both of them are residents, you can file married filing joint. There are certain benefits to filing married filing joint. Your tax rates are lower. You get higher standard deduction, right? So there's a lot of those things, um, right? So if you feel like you're in that scenario where you're married, your spouse also is in the US, maybe on a different visa, and they may be a resident, but you're not, then we can basically use these special elections to treat both of you as residents and file married filing joint, right? But again, these are some complex cases, right? So definitely advise you to consult someone. if you feel like this scenario applies to you. Um, Another important thing, if, for example, people do second masters or they do like another, degree on the same visa. Let's say if people do F1 undergrad, 3, 4 years, and then they transition into grad school. Um, this 5 year period on F1, it basically exhausts after the 5 years. So if you get a new visa or if you go do a new degree program, it will not like renew. So if even if you leave the US, come back on a new F1 visa, you're gonna have to start counting yourself as a resident if you've already stayed in the US on a previous F1 visa for 5 years. So it's basically the exemption for the first 5 years. They don't renew if you do a second degree or get a new F1 visa, right? Same. Days towards SPT start counting after 5 years. So again, once you cross the 5 year on F1, you will, start counting yourself as, resident if you cross the 183-day mark in the US. Okay. All right. So who must file, right? So if you have US source income more than 12,950, or actually for this year, it'll be around 13K or 14K, right? If you have more than that, you should definitely file your tax returns, right? So for 2024, this number will be a little bit higher. But if you earned less than that, should you file? You definitely should, to get a refund, right? Because there is a possibility that your employer may have withheld taxes, right, from your pay if you got W-2, right? There is a chance that your employer may have withheld, right? So if you earned anything less than that, if you file your returns, you'll still, end up getting a getting a refund. At the end of the day, you file tax returns to reconcile, right, what you have paid versus what you should have paid, right? So if you've paid more than what you should have paid, you'll probably end up getting a refund. If you paid nothing, but you were supposed to pay, then you file tax returns to calculate your liability and pay that amount to the IRS, right, or the state authorities, right? So tax returns are basically just reconciling your balances with the authorities, right? So it's always a good idea to file to make sure that you haven't overpaid or underpaid, right? So that's why you should file your tax returns. Common tax forms, right? So some of these forms I'm sure you have already seen, right? W-2, it's from your employer, right? You get that at the end of the year. Um, to see how much you've earned, how much taxes they have withheld, what was the federal, Social Security, Medicare taxes, right? All of that withholding, even state income, state taxes, they're reported there. 1099 NEC, this is a non-employee compensation statement. Again, some people may be working as contractors or, um, they may be paid on an hourly basis. Again, so this is a form that you may receive from your employer that shows how much they have paid you. 1099B is another big one that students get or anyone gets who is investing. Stocks, interest, dividends. You might be familiar with Robinhood, Fidelity, Vanguard, a few of these brokerage platforms. So if you're selling stocks, selling crypto, if you're getting interest dividends, so 1099B, 1099 div, 1099 interest, INT, these are some of the common forms from the brokerage that you may receive. So look out for these forms in your, like, log into Robinhood, log into Fidelity, under the tax section, go look for these forms if you know you sold some stocks last year, right? So that it will report your capital gains, capital losses that need to be reported on your tax returns. 1098T, this is a tuition statement that you get from your university that shows how much you have spent over tuition, like last year, right? So um, non-residents cannot get tuition credits, but residents can. And you can be a resident while you're on an F1, as we just saw, that if you cross the first 5 years on F1, you will be classified as a resident. So let's say if you were doing a second degree master's program and you've crossed the 5 years on F1, definitely get this 1098-T because that can help you increase your refunds, lower your tax liability when you're filing the tax returns. um, a few other forms that are important: 1095A, B, or C, depending on 1095A is health insurance from marketplace, B and C is like through your employers. 1095 or 1099 HC, this is like from Massachusetts state. So at the end of the day, you may get a health insurance statement, right? So something to, claim against your tax returns. Some states have penalties for not having health insurance. So make sure that you have health insurance forms as well for your CPAs to look at when they're filing taxes, right? So you don't get penalized for not having health insurance when you actually did, right? So these are some of the most common forms that you see. So W-2s, 1099s, right? 1098-T. And I have these forms on the bottom right. So W-4, W-9, I-9. These are some of the employment onboarding forms. I'm sure you guys have seen this, but this is mostly like you give these forms to your employer, or the employer basically asks you to complete these forms at the time of onboarding. So when you've gotten a job, when you're joining in to a new job, right, the employer may ask for some of these forms, right? So these are the few forms that you give to the employer versus the ones that you see on the right. Those are the ones that you get at the end of the tax year. Okay. Couple of deductions and credits that you may be eligible for as students, people on visas. Um, Standard deduction. Not all non-residents are eligible for this. I know students from India, for example, they're eligible for a standard deduction for 2024. That's 14,600. Students from China, they're also eligible for, certain standard deduction for a few years of their stay in the US, right? So again, it's very country specific. We'll have to dive into, the US and that particular country's tax treaty to determine if they have a standard deduction, right? But that means that that much income is not taxable, right? Which means anybody who's making like $14,000 from India in the US, like while they're living there, none of that's going to get taxed, right? So it's if you get a W-2, let's say for 13K, the employer has withheld 10%, let's say 1,300 bucks. That's something that you can claim as a refund when you file taxes, right? So it's as easy as that. Different states have rent deductions. I know Massachusetts, California, and some other states even provide like rent deduction to non-residents. There's student loan interest deductions. There's tuition credits, right? That may be eligible for residents, but again, you can be a resident on F1 or J1 as well, right? So, and then the recovery rebate credit or the stimulus checks. This was back in 21, 22. But if you feel like this applies to you and if you haven't filed your taxes from back then, you can reach out and we can evaluate if, this still applies to you and we can help you, claim refunds and whatnot. But these are some of the most common deductions and credits that apply to non-resident and immigrant students. Okay, so we're going to cover some special topics: Social Security and Medicare tax exemption. That's the first one. Non-residents, you're not required to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes, right? So your employers, they don't have to withhold Social Security and Medicare taxes for you. You're exempt from paying these taxes. So if you look into your, I think I have an example. Yes, I'm from the IRS website, right? So if you see here, right, so this is a screenshot right off of the IRS website. Brian will be sharing these slides with you after the call, I think, right? So you can, explore this in more detail. But, foreign students on F1, J1, right, non-immigrant students who have been in the US for less than 5 calendar years are still non-resident aliens are exempt from Social Security and Medicare taxes, right? What that means is, if, for example, this is a template like W-2, you'll see that this box number 4 and 6, right? They basically shouldn't have anything, right? If you're a non-resident, you shouldn't be paying Social Security taxes, Medicare taxes, right? So the box 4 and 6 of your W-2s should be empty. But if you've crossed the F1 period of 5 years, and if you're a resident, then all of these taxes will apply, right? So there are obviously like certain rules that apply to non-residents, right? Which are beneficial for you, right? Because IRS is not treating you as a regular US citizen, US green card holder, right? So you are eligible for more benefits sometimes, right? As compared to US people, because maybe you're not planning to retire here. So what's the point of paying Social Security and Medicare taxes here? So IRS recognizes that and they give you certain exemptions for that. So make sure that you're checking your pay slips, you're communicating that with your employers, right? If you're a non-resident, you shouldn't be paying Social Security and Medicare taxes. The next one up is working in multiple states, especially after COVID. People are working remotely, people are working in different states. As international students, right? If you find opportunities, if your university may be in one state, but you may get an internship in another state, right? So you may move to a different state. That will impact your taxes, right? Because you may be a resident of one state, but maybe temporarily present in another state for a period of 3 or 4 months for an internship, and you may return back to your home state, right? So for state return purposes, right, there will be, you may have to file two state returns along with a federal return. You may have to file a full year return, part year return, or non-resident return, right, depending on, your scenario. Um, but yes, it's very common, for international students to move around. Um, so there is going to be like that multi-state income apportionment factor to consider in your tax returns. Sometimes your employers get it wrong, right? Like you may be living in one state, your employers in another state, they may withhold taxes in a completely different state which you've never even visited, right? So how do you handle a scenario like that, right? Do you file a third state tax returns, right? You just got to make sure that you're not paying taxes like twice or double taxation in two different states. Right. So these are some of the important points to consider when you're, working remotely, working in multiple different states. um, so people use TurboTax and SprintTax, to file tax returns. Firstly, TurboTax like it does not support non-resident taxation, right? So there's no 1040 NR filing with TurboTax, right? So don't like if you're a non-resident, don't do TurboTax. Sprint tax is one that can handle non-resident taxation, but we've seen enough cases where people have filed incorrect returns or returns are being paper filed, right? So these are some of the problems that you see with when you file like with TurboTax as a resident or Sprint tax as a non-resident, right? So there's no 1040 NR filing with TurboTax. Sometimes returns are paper filed, which means it takes forever to process them, right? There's 6 million individual tax returns that are pending with the IRS right now, like after COVID backlog. Avoid paper filing as much as you can. With CPAs and with our firm, for example, we have to e-file, right? Unless we can't e-file, if there are certain special elections, things like that, we're doing to which can only be paper filed. Only then the return is paper filed, but we are legally required to e-file the returns as certified preparers, professionals, by the IRS. A lot of these softwares, TurboTax and SprintTax, it's almost like playing video games, right? It's you're putting in numbers and you don't know the end result. So they can be incorrect returns, right? So you have to be careful there. Certain simple scenarios, right? One W-2 that may still be okay. But again, with moving around different states, changing visa statuses, F1 to H1B, employers incorrectly withholding taxes, there's no way these softwares can get that right because there's a lot of manual calculations that you have to do there. So if you feel like you're in that scenario, incorrect Medicare taxes, overpaying taxes, like from a Social Security and Medicare point of view. Again, there's so many that we've seen like way too much, right? Like where that's why we exist, right? People need our help to figure out like how to file right taxes, right? So again, these are self-prep softwares, missed deductions, missed credits. We've seen that, right? Tax treaties, studying those, you may be from a country, which has certain tax treaties with the US, right? So that's, that requires some research, right? a lot of these softwares, they sometimes it's hard for them to figure that out, right? And then obviously at the end, they don't give any tax advice. There's no one signing off on the tax returns. They don't take accountability. You're the one, it's a self-prep software. You're the one signing off on the return. So in case of any problems, right, you are responsible for your own returns. So there's no legal advice, no tax advice that these softwares will give you. That's something that, we surely give to our clients. Um, so that's a little bit about the different softwares that you can use and the problems that you may face with them. But then we have good reasons why you can consider working with our professional team at USA Tax Gurus. Again, these are some of the reasons. Again, accuracy, right? As a CPA firm, like we have certified EAs, enrolled agents, and CPAs in our team who can help you file tax returns. Right, they will sign off on their own name on your tax returns, so you know that we'll take accountability for the returns. We e-file everything, so there's electronic filing. The returns are processed quicker. It's a more secure way to file tax returns, and they're transmitted directly to the IRS and state. The refund times are also quicker, right? Because everything is getting e-filed. Personalized service, everybody's tax situation is different. No two people's tax situation is the same, right? So you may come from different countries, you may have different dates that you entered the US, you may be on different statuses. So, you may be working like different jobs, 1099Bs, which means like sale of stocks, right? So you may have different scenarios, right? Some of you may be in a situation where you're buying rental properties and things like that, right? So we do offer like very personalized services, and then very competitive prices for like simple filing, right? So for student prices, it starts at 199, and recent grads, like we barely charge like 250. But if your situation is more complex, obviously, we can discuss that detail once if you need help filing your taxes. But after you graduate, right, that's another reason to consider working with a professional, right? You'll have multiple other W-2s, 401ks, IRAs, right? You may have like job assignments in different states, right? So again, multi-state comes in. If you're working in California, RSUs, ESOPs, stock options in the Valley, right? So you'll be getting a lot of those, right? So you got to make sure that you're not getting taxed twice on these. Um, some of you may be, business owners or may look into starting a business, rental properties, or maybe self-employed as well, right? So even more reasons to consider working like with a professional team to handle your taxes, right? So, and then once you graduate, you're also a resident for tax purposes. What that means is, there's more credits, more deductions that open up for you. As a resident, you also got to report your worldwide income. So if you have foreign bank accounts, foreign income, foreign mutual funds, things like that, that all needs to be reported on your US tax returns. But that's after your 5 years on F1, or for example, let's say if you're on H1B, right? Then a lot of those things will apply to you. Um, for students, right? So the base charge is like 199. That includes one federal, one state return, two W-2s, e-filing. So all of that's covered. But if you have a more complicated scenario, for example, stocks, RSUs, ESPPs, what we just discussed, rental properties, multi-state returns, amendments, right? That's where we'll have to personally sit down and figure out like, what we're going to charge you for the filing. But again, we handle everything. But that's a little bit about like, what we can offer you. If you need help filing your taxes, right? So we have, you can go to our website. It's called usataxgurus.com. On the top right, you'll see a login button. So feel free to go there, click on the login button, and then it'll take you to our secure portal on which you can complete your information, right? It's a secure portal where you can enter your name, details, social, like which country you're from. And as you can see, like tab 2, it start asking you about your statuses, right? What visa you're on, right? If you worked in multiple different states, right? So it's a very like dynamic portal, which is um, built for international students, right? It's like the way you change your answers, it'll change, the next question that it'll ask you, right? So it's super dynamic. If you're an F1 person, And if you want to file with us, right, make sure that you're selecting no for this question where it asks you, were you present in the US for more than 5 years, right? So make sure that you select no for this in terms of like deductions and credits, you know, like give us all that option, right? If you have student loan interest, if you have rent payments, right? So indicate like what you have, and then we can then figure out like what deductions and credits you'll qualify for. Um, Foreign travel dates, they're important. They're reported on your 1040 NR. So the portal will guide you on, how to complete all of that information. At the end, you can upload all your documents, W-2s, 1099s, and submit your application. And our team will get back to you within 24 to 48 hours with a customized quote and the timeline and the next steps on how that filing is done. Right. So it's an online organizer that takes care of that. Right. So if you need help filing tax returns, we'll be more than happy to help. At this point, I think we can dive into the questions. But yeah, last slide from us, right? If you're a book, I would advise whoever's on this call, right? Click a picture of this slide, right? If you need to book a consultation, we're offering free consultations as well. So feel free to scan the QR, and we'll be happy to, give you a free consultation on your tax situation. But if your tax situation is pretty simple, and if W-2s, 1099s, if it's majorly that, you can even just go directly into our portal, which is, again, usataxgurus.com, and click on the login button. Right? So either or, right? You want to talk to us. But if you want to file, just follow the steps, complete the application, submit the application, and then we can get back to you. But yeah, that's who we are, USA Tax Gurus, and we'll be more than happy to help you file your taxes. Yeah, or
Right.
I'll let Ryan take over.
Thank you so much, Akhil, for the wonderful presentation and provide the platform for us to actually navigate the tax situations. And we did have a lot of questions collected already. And for everybody joining this session, if you join at the beginning or middle part, we usually like to do this Q&A session at the end of like the second half of the sessions. So if you still have a questions, like a follow-up questions regarding what Akhil have just said, please feel free to send them into the Q&A. Our coordinator is still collecting all of the questions at the moment. So let's go by the orders that we have. I hope everybody could see the questions. I know the letters might be a little bit small. I'll read out every questions. So first one, if I got married during the year, but received the marriage certificate in late December, should I file taxes as single or married?
If you're married as of December 31st, you can file a married filing joint or a married filing separate tax return. Right. So the MFJ or MFS, that really depends on your status, right? If you're an F1, if you're a non-resident or a resident. But yes, if the marriage certificate doesn't really matter, it's more on facts and circumstances, right? If you got married during the year, you got married during the year, right? So you will be considered married for tax purposes. Now, married filing separate, married filing joint, that's a separate conversation.
Okay, absolutely. Moving on to the next one. My employer is deducting Social Security and Medicare taxes from my OPT paycheck. How can I prove that my employer that I'm exempt from those taxes?
Um, so if you're on OPT, we need to check if you're a resident or a non-resident, right? If you're during the first 5 years of your F1, and you're on OPT, then they shouldn't be withholding those, right? And I think if you go back into the presentation that Ryan's gonna share, right? That screenshot that I shared, right? That's an official legal IRS source. So you can show them that screenshot or the link that's there, right? But just do a quick Google search, and you'll be able to find that non-residents are exempt from Social Security and Medicare taxes, and you can share that link with the employer and their payroll department, right? At that point, they should acknowledge, that you're a non-resident. They should stop withholding those taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we have you, Akil, do you mind me just send like the presentation link to the chat so everybody could just access that right now? So that if they wanted to visit that later, we can also do that as well.
Yeah, if you wanna share the view only link, right? I think we should be fine with that.
Sure.
Um,
Okay. And move on to the third one. I've been in the US on F1 since 2019, December. Am I considered a resident for tax purposes?
yeah, so if you entered the US on in December 2019, it's pretty easy, right? So 2019 is your first year, 2020, 21, 22, 23, right? So these were your first 5 years as a non-resident. So 2024 will be a resident tax filing. So you will be considered a tax resident for tax purposes for 24 and all the years going forward.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. My spouse is on an F2 visa. Should we file taxes jointly or separately?
It really depends if you're a resident or not. If you're a resident, then you can file a married filing joint return. Um, but again, it really depends if your spouse even has a tax ID number in the US, right? So if she's on an F2 visa, she may not have a social security number. So you may have to, you can file jointly under two clauses, right? If you're a resident, and secondly, if your spouse has an ITIN, right? And if they don't have an ITIN, they can apply for the ITIN with the tax return, right? So filing jointly is definitely possible, but it's more paperwork, but it also means higher deductions, lower tax, lower tax liability and lower tax rates, right? Um, so if you're ready to do all of that, definitely file jointly.
Thank you for that. And move on. Next question, I think is a great question. So, how do I correct mistakes on my previously submitted tax return? For example, the form 1040X.
So the 1040X is the amendment filing, right? So if you know that you filed incorrect taxes in the past on a 1040 or a 1040 NR, the way to correct that is by filing a 1040X, which is an amendment filing, right? So 1040X is the answer. But how do you correct it? Like I would advise that you take help here from, experts rather than trying to figure that out yourself. Because if you did try to figure it out once and you did not get it right, you don't want to play around with your taxes that much.
Okay. Move on. I'm an F1 student in US since 2023 August. I received both an F2 a W-2 and a 1098-T form. Can I use the 1098-T form when filing taxes?
Great question, but unfortunately, no, because if you entered the US on F1 in 2023, so 23, 24, right? So 2024 will be your non-resident year. As we discussed, non-residents do not get tuition credits, right? So the 1098T doesn't really apply to you, right? It's only a form that you got, but you're not going to get any benefits for that because you're still a non-resident.
Okay. All right, move on. I've been on an F1 visa for over 5 years as of November 2024. Do I start counting days for the 183-day residency test from that time onward?
Mm, F1 students are, oh, wait, it said I've been on F1 for over 5 years as of December 2024. Um, So, like I said, the month doesn't really matter, right? So you're looking at years. So if you entered the US in 2019, let's say, so 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, right? Those were your first 5 years as a non-resident. But if you entered the US in 2020, then the entire year of 2024, you'll still be like that'll still be the fifth year of your non-resident filing, right? So you only start counting your days towards SPT the next year from Jan 1 of the following year, right? So to answer this question, right, We'll have to see like when you entered the US, either 2019 or 2020.
That's good. You still provided two options. That would be either one of these options.
Yeah.
So move on. If filing jointly with my F2 spouse, is Form 8843 still needed?
Mm, 8843 will not be needed if you're filing jointly with your spouse, because if you're filing jointly, then you're basically saying that you're filing as residents, and 8843 is a form that only applies to non-residents, right? So 8843 will apply if you're a non-resident, and if you're a non-resident, you can't really file married filing joint, right? So trick question, huh?
All right, and next one is income from a graduate assistantship or scholarship taxable under my F1.
Yes and no, depending on the tax treaty of the country that you come from, right? So it may be taxable under the US laws, but it may be exempt under the treaty laws, right? So it may be taxable, it may not be taxable, and then it also depends on what that money was used for. If it was used for tuition, it may be exempt, but if it was used for room and board, then it will be taxable, right? So a few things to consider here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, move on. If I earn profit in stocks, but lost in the investment last year, for example, if I earn profit this year but lost last year, do I still file for the exact money that I earned this year?
Um, yeah, I mean, so it says if I earned profit in stocks but lost on stock investments last year, um, I'm assuming that, the person has capital gains as well as capital losses in this
Right.
scenario. If that's the case, you should definitely file, because you can use the losses to reduce your tax liability, right? So the losses, they're a good thing, right, when it comes to taxes, because you can use the losses to reduce your tax liability, right? So if you have gains, um, you have to pay taxes, but if you have losses, um, you could use those losses to reduce your tax liability. So losses are good.
So if, for example, like a follow-up to the question, if somebody didn't make any capital gain for this whole year for 2024,
Mhm,
should
mhm.
they still submit like a investment form, a tax form to file for that loss that they have?
Um, Sorry, can you repeat your question, Ryan?
Right.
You said,
I'm just saying that if they didn't make any capital profit, like capital gain, any profit, should they still file for that? Uh, because
yeah,
there's
the losses. Yeah, the losses carry forward, right? That's important thing, right? If you don't file tax returns this year, then you can't take those losses in future years, right? So file the taxes, report the losses, and
Mm,
even if you don't have any income or gains, just report the losses so you can carry forward the losses to future years.
okay. Okay, absolutely. Sounds good. Moving on, what happened if we file as resident instead of non-resident? That's also a good question.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of people do that, right? File incorrect returns. I mean, firstly, it's legally incorrect, right? So you could get in troubles. Secondly, when you're filing as a resident, that means you're telling the government that, hey, tax me as a proper US citizen, US resident, right? So you may end up paying more taxes than you're required, Social Security, Medicare, things like that. But also, you may end up claiming credits and deductions that you're not eligible for, right? For example, tuition credits, right? You can claim them as a resident, but can't claim them as a non-resident. But if you file as a resident, that means you're claiming deductions and credits that you're not eligible for or qualified for. So um, I would not recommend doing that, because again, you're here on a visa, right? So in future, I know like if you switch from like to a green card or move from H1B and get a green card or citizenship, they are like you are required to like uh, present your last few years of tax returns, right? So that could get you in trouble if you don't have the tax filings correct.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next question. If it's my fifth year filing taxes on OPT, I meet the substantial presence test. Should I file as a resident or non-resident? I think this question is very similar to the other one that we have. Uh,
Mhm.
but but please go ahead.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of like your choice where you ask like if we should file as a resident or you don't really have a choice. It's factual, right? Either you will file as a resident or you will file as a non-resident depending on your status. So again, it really depends on the year that you entered the US. If you entered the US in 2019, 2024 will be a resident year. If you entered the US in 2020, then 2024 will be a non-resident year. As simple as that.
Absolutely. All right, move on. I switched from OPT to H1B in this October. Which tax form should I file, and what else do I need to consider?
Same thing, right? So this is a little bit tricky because first 9 months you were on F1, right? And then the last 3 months you were on H1B. Um, the days you were on H1B, you will count towards SPT, which means that's 90 days. That's less than 183 days, right? So technically a non-resident filing, but you also have to look at when did you enter the US, right? So if you entered again, same answer, right? If you entered the US in 2020 or later, right, 2024 will be considered a non-resident year. If you entered the US in 2019 or before, then for this particular question, you will file a resident filing.
Absolutely. Next one, this person just wanted to know more about what would be the benefit of having your services to file for their taxes.
Of course, firstly, the expertise in international taxes, right? So we're very proud to say that, we've been filing, we filed hundreds of tax returns or even thousands at this point for non-residents, right? So doing that research for you, looking at tax treaties, making sure that, firstly you're compliant, that your tax returns are accurate, and finding all the deductions and credits that you may qualify for, and e-filing the returns. Every return goes through a multiple stage like prep, review, sign off, right? You have experts signing off on the returns. So there's all of those things, which will definitely make us, a good choice if you need help filing your taxes, and want to be compliant and get the best out of your money, maybe even higher refunds because, we can look for those extra deductions and credits, that these automated softwares may not.
Sure. Next one, can I claim the cost of my textbook or course fees on my tax return?
As a resident, yes, because you can get some tuition credits, and but as a non-resident, you can't.
So for example, if somebody just came in as an F1 student, they're currently students, but less than 5 years being
Yeah,
students, they couldn't have this tax return under their textbook and course fees. But if they stayed in the US as an F1 for multiple years, maybe
yeah,
they've already become a resident, but they're still taking classes, then they
yeah,
can get the tax return from that end.
correct. So they'll get the 1098-T from the college, report that on their taxes, get tuition credits through that route.
Yeah, I think that would apply to some of the students on day one CPT because
Correct.
maybe on their second master or like a doctoral program
Yes,
that they're technically tax residents, but they are still taking classes and paying for tuition.
absolutely.
All right, and then move on. As an F1 OPT student, staying in the state for over 6 months. I think this I don't know. I'm not sure if it's 6 months or 6 years because you mentioned that you're OPT. So, but either way, this person also wanted to know that um, if he or she qualified to be a resident or tax non-resident.
I think they're talking about states and not really federal side, right? So we'll have to see what state they're talking about, California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, right? So there's no set rule on 6 months for states. Every state has its own residency. Some states follow the federal convention, which means if you're a non-resident on the federal side, you will be a non-resident on the state side. But some states do not acknowledge the federal convention for this. So you have to dive into that particular state's residency laws to figure out if you're a resident or a non-resident for that state. 50 different states, 50 different rules, right? So it's diving into each of these states' rules to figure out if you're a resident or a non-resident.
Next one, somebody is sharing an example. If, for example, as a F1 OPT non-resident, with an income of this number, and how much tax refund can the person actually expect? If I guess coming from a W-2 perspective, because we don't have that information as well.
Yeah, it really comes down, like I said, right? Tax returns, you file taxes to reconcile those numbers, right? So it really depends how much taxes were withheld by your employer, right? Let's say if your employer withheld $30,000, right? But your actual tax liability is only $20,000, then you'll get 10,000 as a refund. But let's say if your employer only withheld $5,000, but your tax liability is $20,000, then you're not going to get a refund. You're going to have to pay $15,000 with the tax return. Right? So it really comes down to what was withheld, and then based on that, we can calculate like the refunds.
Yeah, and then with what we held, I think it should be easy to look that up through your own HR system or your payroll system that you can see in each month how much money are actually being withheld from the
Yeah,
payroll.
W-2 box 2 also reports your federal income tax withholding.
Absolutely. All right, move on. Do I need to include the 1098-T form when I file for the non-resident tax reform return?
You can't, right? Non-residents can't do 1098Ts or tuition credits.
Okay. Next one, I'm an OPT from Kazakhstan and started working in September 2024 with tax treaty. Do I still need to pay federal and state taxes if I stay in the US the whole year?
Mm, US source income is still going to be taxed, right? So you still have to file your taxes, and and then we can dive into like the tax treaty and figure out if US and Kazakhstan has any special treaty that exempts that income from getting taxed. But if there's no treaty or no special clauses for that income um, to be exempt, then yes, you will have to pay taxes on your income in the US.
Move on. If I didn't earn any income last year, do I still need to file taxes as an F1?
Yes, you're required to file the 8843 form, even if you don't have any income, right? Because that's where you determine or show the IRS that you're an exempt individual. So form 8843, that's required even if you don't have any income.
Okay, good to know. Next one, can I use SpringTax or other software to file both federal and state taxes as non-residents?
Yes, you can.
All right, next one, what should I do if my name or SSN is incorrect? Oh, on the W-2 form.
You should reach out to your employer and ask them to give you a W-2C, which is basically a corrected W-2. Right? So you should report this discrepancy on like to the payroll department of your company, ask them to reissue like the correct forms for you.
Right. And since the tax deadline for this is approaching, it's April 15th. So I highly encourage you to do that if you do find this mistake happen. Um, I think because of the timing sake, we can go ahead and do one last question before I let everybody go. Can I deduct moving expenses if I relocate for my OPT job?
Um, it depends. Firstly, sometimes the employer reimburses you for the moving expenses, right? So if you're getting reimbursed, then you don't really have an expense. Secondly, if you're not getting reimbursed, then you also got to look at, not all states allow you to deduct moving expenses. Um, On the federal side, you're not allowed to claim any moving expenses, but on the states side, you may be eligible for. I know California, for example, allows some moving expense deductions. There's 50 different states. We'll have to look into each specific state. Which state did you move from? Which state did you move to? And if any of those two states give reallocation benefits.
Absolutely. All right. I think this is it. That wraps up today's session. We still have a couple questions we haven't answered yet, but that's okay. If you wanted to dive deeper into how to file your taxes for this year, scan the QR code. We can connect you with the KO directly. And then if you have other questions regarding CPT or anything like that, we can happy to take a look at and help you. And I want to thank Akil and his team again for coming into today's sessions to help everybody out. And I hope everybody do learn something from today's session. Thank you, Akil.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you everyone. And I know I haven't introduced my team, but we have Annie and Rahul from my team as well. So if you're, going to be working with us, you'll definitely meet one of them. If you're calling our firm or talking to us, right? Most likely you'll be talking to Annie, Rahul, or I, right? So we'll get you onboarded. But yeah, that's Annie and Rahul from my team. And thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks,
Yeah.
Subole. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then before I let you go, we mentioned something about sharing the slides with our audience. And we wanted to send the links out to everybody, but the slides is private at the moment. So if you
mhm.
can turn that to viewable to public, we'll send a follow-up email to everybody who attended or didn't attend so they can get the resources their way.
Give me 1 second while we do that. Perfect. I think I have that.
All right.
So should I put it in the chat?
You can put it in the chat and I'll also send a follow-up email to everybody.
Okay, great. I've just messaged in the chat. I think it should be open now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I
Yeah,
hope everybody have a good night, and I'll see you in our next session. All right. Thank you, Akil. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Annie.
thank
Thanks
you.
all for coming in. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Bye-bye.